It's now my pleasure to welcome Anna Middleton, who's Head of Society and Ethics Research at the Wellcome Genome campus in Cambridge, UK. She has a dual training, both as a practicing genetic counselor and as a social scientist. Currently, she is chair or vice chair of the Association of Genetic Nurses and Counselors, and you're going to see some very exciting work. But I wanted to read off a list of her Your DNA, Your Say, which you see on your program, of the number of languages that this is actually translated into already and being translated into in the future. Currently, English, Russian, Portuguese, Polish, German, French, Arabic. The following languages on the way: Japanese, Mandarin, Swedish, Icelandic, Urdu, Italian, Zulu, and Spanish. I mean, that is truly international, so it's a pleasure to welcome you, Anna.
Good afternoon. So what do the broader public think about their DNA, their medical information bouncing around the internet, being used in the research sharing endeavour? Well, we don't know until we actually ask them. So on behalf of the Participant Values Task Team, I'm going to be sharing with you details of this international survey that we've been conducting to actually ask the public, what do you know about this field? What do you think about what's happening? What are your expectations? Now, this is actually a challenge when we know from empirical data that the vast majority of the public have not actually even heard of the word genomics. So in a recent survey we did in the UK, we asked the British public, have you heard of the word genomics? And 82% said no, no clue. People have heard of the word DNA, and they often think that's to do with crime scenes and identifying bodies. But in terms of the whole genomic data sharing endeavour, the broader public are largely unaware of what this is all about. So if you want to actually ask their views and opinions, you have to get creative in how you engage them. So we have used a series of films to bring people up to speed really quickly with the issues in a non-threatening, easy to understand way to basically explain what all of this is about, to give people the background information to then be able to answer questions about this. So I wanted to share with you, this is what the survey looks like, and share with you one of the films that we have in the survey that basically explains what genomic data sharing is about. Oops, go back.
DNA and medical information sit in databases. It's used to answer questions about health and disease. Hi, I'm a medical doctor. I'm a scientist, and I represent a pharmaceutical company. Any of us may need to access the DNA and medical information in the database. But none of us know who the information belongs to because all names have been removed. As you can see, some contain the information we need. It's like collecting pieces of a jigsaw. And some we cannot open because we do not have the right key from the gatekeeper. Would you like to see a readout of your DNA information? Databases are accessed via the web. DNA and medical information are accessed every second.
Okay, so these films have actually received recognition in their own right and have been selected for showing at 5 different film festivals around the world in the UK, USA, and in Norway. So it shows that they have the ability to talk and speak to a mainstream audience. Okay, so this is what the landing page of the survey looks like at the moment. So we're currently recruiting in German, English, Polish, Portuguese, and Russian. And as Martha mentioned, we've got Japanese, Arabic, Zulu, Icelandic, Swedish, Italian, Mandarin, Urdu, Hindi, French, Spanish, all in various different stages. This is an unfunded project. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank all the wonderful social scientists around the world who are doing these translations for free and recruiting into this survey for free. And I'm going to tell you about the preliminary results from the English-speaking respondents today. We've only just started analysing the data. I haven't even managed to get it out widely to the participant values task team yet, but it's all happening, it's all very new, and we're going to be analysing this moving forward. So for the English-speaking participants, we used a market research company to recruit because we wanted to get a representative sample, public samples. So we used a company called Research Now, which is like Ipsos Mori. And we've checked the data that we've got with census data and population data, and we know that these are representative public samples. So we've got samples from the UK, USA, Canada, and Australia, and here are the figures. So we've got just under 10,000. There are subtle differences between the different demographic groups, and we've adjusted for those in all the modelling that we've done. But actually, broadly speaking, there isn't a difference in attitudes between these four countries, which is absolutely fascinating. So I'm actually going to pull together all the English-speaking data and present it as one. So one of the first questions in the survey was about familiarity with DNA genetics and genomics. So here's the question. Are you familiar with DNA genetics and genomics? And just under half of the sample said no. And those who said yes get their reference to this whole industry through either their work as a teacher or as a nurse, through their personal interests, so perhaps having ancestry testing or maybe being part of a biobank research, or through their medical history, their personal family history of something. What was also really notable was that people also said that they got their familiarity with genetics from popular culture, from the media, from TV programs, from CSI, from the pseudoscience that we absorb by just being in society. And that's actually incredibly important and is highly likely to be influencing some of the attitudes that we're seeing, and I'll come back to that later. Another early question in the questionnaire is DNA information different to other sorts of medical information, like a cholesterol reading or an X-ray? And often we feel in the genomics world that genomics data is exceptional in some way, and I've not actually seen in any surveys asking patients or public if they think it's different to medical data. So this is the question. Is DNA information different to other sorts of medical information? And we found just over half of people said, yes, it's different. So why are they saying that? They're saying things like, it's special because it links us to our relatives. It's special because it can tell me about my past, present, and future health. It's different because I can pass it on to children. Now, just because they think it's different, does it mean they think it should be handled differently? Should it be given any sort of level of special status in the data sharing process? Well, the simple answer to that is no. So should DNA data be handled differently to other sorts of online data that we have about ourselves online? So here is the question. Which types of online data need the greatest level of protection against unauthorised use? And we found 61% said medical data needs the greatest level of protection. Slightly less said DNA information needs the greatest level of protection. Hardly anybody said holiday photos need the greatest level of protection. But fascinating, most people said banking details need the greatest level of protection. They were able to articulate, I can see a real harm if my banking data is hacked. People could steal money from me. But they were not saying similar things when they were talking about medical information and DNA information. So that says to me that we don't need to be thinking of the equivalent, secure banking systems for the sharing and the storage of our data. I think it's good to be aiming for that, but the public are maybe not expecting that. So would you donate your data? What do you think about your data being used in this research endeavour? So here's the question. Would you donate your anonymous DNA and or medical information for use by medical doctors, non-profit researchers and for-profit researchers? And we explained how they might use your data. And just over half said yes, they were happy for medical doctors to use their data. Slightly less said yes for non-profit researchers, and less, again, for the for-profit industry using their data. Now, this isn't a new finding. This has been replicated in many other studies, and it really speaks volumes to the idea of the pharma industry doing some really major PR campaigns about the value of data sharing and the use of data in, our collective endeavour to improve human health. So there was definitely concern about pharma making profits from free donation. This came up particularly from the American participants. Why should I donate my data and yet others make money from it? What was also really striking was that those people who were the most willing to donate their data were the most familiar with the topic of genomics. And the most familiar with genomics were the patients. And the patients were actually the most likely to say, go use my data. I really don't mind if you identify me. I would accept a very high risk of being identified because I acknowledge that using my data is a good thing and I want you to go and do great things with it. So what's the profile of people who say they were willing to donate their data for use by others and for it to be shared? Well, they tended to be very familiar with the concepts of DNA genetics and genomics. They were also more likely to think DNA is different to the sorts of medical data. They were more comfortable donating if they knew there was legal protection in place. They were also more interested in receiving something back in return, like a DNA readout. That really means raw sequence data or return of results. They were also the most comfortable about handing over their data and allowing some responsible person, so whether that was an ethics committee or a custodian, deciding on their behalf what could happen to that data. So they were quite a chilled bunch. They were informed, they were happy to engage, they were happy for you to go and use their data. The profile of those who said they didn't want to donate their data were the most likely to be completely unfamiliar with what any of this is about. They didn't particularly think that DNA was special or different to other sorts of data. They weren't influenced by the knowledge of legal protections being in place for them. They had no opinion on having anything back in return. And they had no opinion on a custodian or a research ethics committee deciding on their behalf what would happen to their data. So basically the bottom line is they just were completely unaware of what any of this was about. What was also really significant is that there's no difference in any of the socio-demographic variables between those who wanted to donate and those who didn't. So it's not as if the donors were more educated or of a particular gender or of a particular age. There was actually no difference in any of the socio-demographics between those who were willing to donate and those who weren't. The only difference between the two groups was familiarity with this work. And also there was no difference in the perceived fears. I'll explain the data on the fears in a minute. But we asked people, if we linked your data, your online data with your personally identifiable data, what harms could happen? And people were able to articulate their fears, but there was no difference between those who would donate and those who wouldn't donate and their perceived fears. So basically people are not donating because they're frightened. That's not what we've seen. And we've found that people who are donating are able to articulate the fears, but it doesn't actually matter to them. They're just aware of what the potential risks are, and they're still willing to donate. So what are the perceived harms? So we said, if someone linked your DNA information to your name, your address, and your phone number, do you think you could be harmed in any way from this? And we asked people to rank their concerns. So the number 3 concerns was being targeted for inappropriate marketing. The second biggest concern was insurance discrimination. This always comes up in any surveys about genetics. But the number 1 potential harm that people were concerned about was my DNA being copied and then planted at the scene of a crime. Now, if you think programs like CSI have somewhere between 30 to 50 million viewers per episode, and that's just in the US, never mind worldwide. You can see if this is the way people are gaining knowledge, pseudo-knowledge about genetics via a process of osmosis with popular culture, it completely makes sense that this might be in your mind when you're thinking about potential harms from being identified together with your DNA information. And you know, learning of this concern means that's actually something that we can address quite clearly, easily, with some good information to, you know, clear up misunderstandings about this. Now, interestingly, before I started working on this project, I was running a project called Socializing the Genome, which is where we were looking to create evidence-based public engagement materials about different things to do with genetics. And one of the films that we created was looking at the idea of conspiracy theories that people have about genetics and whether we could use those as a sort of conversation starter and allow people to engage with genetics through the conspiracy theories. And serendipitously, one of the films we created really speaks to this. So if we were thinking about creating public engagement materials to address this kind of concern, it might look something like this, which I'm just going to show you.
Your DNA, amazing, packed with rich, intimate information about you, which is why you're not sharing it with anyone, right? Because in our data-filled, joined-up world, it might get stuck together with all your other precious data, right? And you can't trust who'll get their hands on that, right? Well, not quite. To be clear, the only thing someone dodgy looking at your anonymous DNA sequence will see is this. And speaking of dodgy, let's take a closer look at some of the fantastical bogeymen out there. The weird scientist, dodgy corporation, and the criminal mastermind. Well, the scientist would be caught pretty quick, lose their job, and probably spend time in jail if they even thought of stealing your DNA. If a dodgy corporation tried to use your DNA data to cold call you or discriminate against you, they'd be breaking the law. And as for planting your DNA at a crime scene, all we'd say is, don't believe everything you see on CSI. So, what might your DNA spell for you?
So this is very culturally British, and I'd always say that if you're wanting to create public engagement materials, always tailor-make them to your audience so that they culturally fit. So the key messages from this research, those unwilling to donate their data are basically totally unfamiliar with what any of this is about. So that really speaks to doing public engagement and putting out education programs and actually bringing people up to speed with some of this. Those most in favour of donating are patients. They are the most altruistic. They are prepared to accept a high level of being identified. They feel the act of donating and use of their data outweighs the risks. The public can articulate the harms of identification, and this does not seem to affect their willingness to donate. We should be explicit about what the risks are, and this data is saying it won't put people off, it just means they're better informed. They can weigh up the pros and cons. The public are more worried about banking data being hacked than genomic data. And popular culture influences our views about genomics. And so I would, thinking about moving forward, I think we should be using popular culture as a springboard for starting conversations. It's a big, big audience out there that we can tackle and reach through popular culture. It's pivotal to collect patient and public attitudes, and all of our data will be freely available online so that you can all scrutinise it. It'll be there for social sciences data to be shared. It's pivotal to do this so that policy, particularly made by the Global Alliance, has a public voice in it. It also means that we can target and inform our engagement and education activities. But the most important reason for actually collecting this data is really so that we as a society are guiding the application of the technology rather than the other way round. Thank you.